Hey everyone, what's going on? It's Professor Leis here. In this video, I'd like to walk you through the prompt for major essay project number 3, so let's jump right in here. Just a little bit of context. I'm going to quote from a book that I tend to use in my English 100 course because I like the way that the authors really characterize the goal and mission and spirit of research and creating argument. So if it sounds a little unfamiliar at first, don't worry. You're not lost. I'm just quoting from a book that I tend to use in my English 100 courses. So, all right, let's get started. In their book, Habits of the Creative Mind, authors Richard E. Miller and Ann Jurecic write that the writing prompt, properly conceived, is an invitation to embark into unmapped worlds, to improvise, to find unexpected beauty in the challenges that arise. In our final essay project of the semester, we are challenged to write a research-based essay of 8 to 10 pages, more than 2,000 words, that explores a particular aspect of a topic that genuinely interests us. Typically, in a research-based essay, we may be tempted to choose a position in a debate and find evidence to support our position. This model is the basis for the 5-paragraph essay, a model we are no longer using. However, as Miller and Jurecic explain in Habits of the Creative Mind, we know that practicing argument as debate produces writing that isn't persuasive or compelling or interesting to read. So in our classes, we ask our students to think of essay writing as a speculative journey. What's the difference? When you write speculatively, you begin not with a predetermined destination, your thesis, but with the goal of answering a question or solving a problem. You consider different routes to get to this goal. You do research and rethink your plan. You learn more and more. You write, make mistakes, and head off in new and unanticipated directions. You make discoveries. Your paper is your attempt to come to some kind of answer to your question. How are you putting pieces of information together to create new meaning? How are you connecting different ideas together to create new ideas? So a little bit of context here. Let me explain what the authors are getting at, what Miller and Jurecic are getting at in this quotation here is that the typical way of approaching a research-based essay is going to be following this argument as debate pattern or style. And in that style, what we do is we tend to just choose a side on a debate. So it doesn't matter if we've done any research or whatever. We just pick a side like, oh, I'm going to write a paper where I'm talking about we need to do X, Y, or Z. And so we just choose the side right from the beginning. And then what we do is we try to find evidence to support our position. But the problem with that, as Miller and Jurecic point out, is that this type of writing tends not to be very persuasive. It tends not to be very compelling or interesting. It's just sort of lifeless writing that isn't being used in such a way that's going to help you, the writer, learn anything. Because what you're doing is you're just trying to confirm a belief that you already hold to be true. And so what we tend to do is we look for evidence to support that belief, and we exclude any kind of evidence that's going to complicate or challenge that belief. And in the end, when we're doing that, as I mentioned, we're not going to learn anything. So what we want to do instead is we want to practice this style of argument as journey, or argument as speculative journey, as Miller and Jurecic say. And what that simply means is that we're going to embark on a learning experience for ourselves as the writer of this paper. Excuse me. So it's really important that we don't just pick a side and then try to find evidence to support that side. Instead, we want to begin with an open-ended question, some sort of research question that could have many different possible responses to it, any number of possible valid responses to it. And what we're going to need to do is consult a wide variety of different sources, different perspectives, ideas, in order to come to the best possible response to our question. And so what we're doing then is we're not trying to find evidence to just support a belief that we already hold to be true. We're trying to find evidence and consult lots of different sources in order to weigh what is going to be the best possible response to that question, in order to put all these different pieces of these different perspectives, these different sources together in such a way that's going to create new meaning, create new ideas, and in the end is going to be an enriching learning experience for us as the writers of our paper. So we want to keep that in mind. Excuse me. The goal of this writing project is not to try to convince or persuade your readers that your position is right. When released from the burden of trying to persuade our readers, we can then use our writing as a way of learning for us, which ultimately is one of the most important purposes of writing. This will also influence the tone you take in your essay. Seek to build an invitational tone, not a confrontational, adversarial, or arrogant tone. So this is really important as well. So our goal with this essay project is not to try to convince our readers or persuade our readers that our position is right. What tends to happen if we go in with that goal is we're very forceful and often confrontational in our tone. And so we tend to turn readers off pretty quickly because they feel like they're being preached to or yelled at, and typically that's not a good approach. But when we are released of that burden, when we're not trying to persuade anybody, we're simply trying to lay out a coherent and logical and cogent exploration into a topic, then we're more likely to take on what we can call an invitational tone, where we're inviting our readers to come along on this journey with us so that they can kind of see our thought process and see how we're making connections and see how we're analyzing different sources and weighing the merits of different perspectives in order to come to the best possible response to our research question. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. We're not trying to persuade or convince anybody. We're simply trying to take them through this journey, this learning experience in writing form. Begin by doing some exploratory research about a topic that interests you, an event, a concept or idea, a cultural phenomenon, or potential solutions to a problem. As Miller and Jurecic suggest in their book, begin in a state of not knowing, rather than committing yourself to a claim you came up with before you've done any curiosity-driven research. So this is, I want to pause for a sec here. This is a very good way of thinking of how we should approach our essays, is to begin in a state of not knowing. And what that means is that you're not looking to, going back to what I mentioned earlier, we're not just setting out immediately trying to pick a side in a debate and then trying to find evidence to support that position. Instead, we have an open-ended research question, one that could have any number of possible valid responses, and we're simply trying to figure out how to respond to that question. So we're beginning in a state of not knowing. So if we commit ourselves to a thesis right away without having done any research first, then we're practicing argument as debate, what we were talking about up here earlier, and that's something that we want to avoid. Okay, so begin in a state of not knowing rather than committing yourself to a claim you came up with before you've done any curiosity-driven research. So in other words, we want to do research first before we begin to figure out what our perspective is on a given topic or issue that we're researching. In our course textbook, Everything's an Argument, Lunsford and Riskovich offer some advice that pairs well with Miller and Jurecic's statement. They write, familiarize yourself with what's been said about your subject and especially with the controversies that currently surround it. After a while, questions about this topic should arise. Craft an open-ended question about your topic to guide your research. Open-ended questions can't be easily answered and require careful research and consideration. Embrace confusion and complexity. Don't shy away from the gray areas of an issue. So what this means, if we're going to look at this statement by Lunsford and Riskovich, is that it's important to consult a wide variety of perspectives that are surrounding a given issue that we're researching. So in other words, we want to read a wide variety of sources, look at a lot of different opinions on the matter so that we can see what's going on, see what people are saying about it, and then familiarize ourselves with these different perspectives. So again, we can figure out what would be the best possible response to our open-ended research question. So the open-ended research question, it's not meant to appear necessarily in the essay itself. It's meant to be something that you use to guide your research. Research is really just trying to find answers. And so in order to help guide our answer finding journey, we need to have a question to try to answer, right? So that's what we mean by crafting an open-ended question. And so an open-ended question means that there could be many possible equally valid responses. So that's important to keep in mind. We are challenged to incorporate material from at least 8 credible and relevant sources, 5 of which should be found using the library's online databases. So our whole essay, by the time we submit our polished draft, will need to have a minimum of 8 credible and relevant sources. Now, of those 8 sources, we need to have a minimum of 5 that are found using the online library databases. So Gale eBooks, Opposing Viewpoints in Context, those are 2 examples of databases that we can access through the library. Those are good starting points, but also we want to make sure that we're not just limiting our research to those 2 databases. Like I said, those are useful for providing background information and pointing us in the direction of other sources, but also use EBSCOhost to find some of your sources in order to adopt the voice of a reasonable, fair-minded, and careful thinker who is interested in coming as close to the truth about a topic as possible. We must consult a wide variety of sources and a wide variety of perspectives, even if they are ones we do not hold ourselves. So there's going to be a separate video that will walk you through the process of accessing the various library databases. So please make sure that you watch that video and familiarize yourself with the databases. Some of you may have learned about these in other courses, such as English 100. But it's important that at least 5 of our sources come from these library online databases. And it's really important that we adopt the voice of a reasonable, fair-minded, and careful thinker. So I really like the way that Lunsford and Ruskovich characterize that here. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are consulting a wide variety of sources, but also we want to make sure that we are interested as coming as close to the truth about a topic as possible. And so in order to do that, we need to be diligent in the types of sources that we access so that we're making sure that the information we're basing our argument on is going to be credible, relevant, good quality information, and not just some random stuff we find on the internet, which we all know is a great place, but there's also a lot of crazy stuff out there, so we want to be mindful of that. Before committing to a topic, think about your own values and interests in the world. What do you hold to be important? What are your career goals? What are your hobbies? What sparks your curiosity and imagination? Topics that we have a personal stake in tend to be more interesting to research and write about, and consequently more interesting for our audience to read about. As Lunsford and Ruskovich write, look for an issue that intrigues you, one you want to learn more about. One of the hardest parts of producing an academic argument is finding a topic narrow enough to be manageable in the time you have to work on it, but also rich enough to sustain your interest over the same period. Rather than researching the topic generally, however, try to find a specific conflict, issue, or question within this topic. We want to be as narrow and specific as we can for such a short paper. Now, I don't mean this part here to be sarcastic. In the grand scheme of things, 8 pages really is not that long of an essay. It's certainly not enough space to solve all of the world's problems. So that's important to keep in mind. So begin by thinking about what your interests are in the world. Okay, this is really important. So, what do you hold to be important in the world? What do you care about? What are you concerned about? What sparks your curiosity? What are you into? So, really looking at the things that you care about can give you some insight into what kind of topic you want to research. That's really important, that it is a topic that you genuinely care about, you want to know more about, you have curiosity about that topic, and so that will help your process go much more smoothly when you're researching and writing, because if it's something that you care about, then you're going to want to know more about it, and so it's going to be a more enjoyable process for you. Y'all can hear my cat. She wants to join in. All right, you tell him. Okay, so moving on. So keep that in mind. We want to make sure that we are, we're choosing a topic that we want to know more about. But also, we want to try to make our topics as specific as we can. As I mentioned, 8 pages really is not that long of a paper in the grand scheme of things. And so if we want to tackle a really great, really large problem, such as something like climate change, for example, that's a really, really huge, complex issue with many, 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 many aspects to it, right? So instead of talking about something like climate change in general, you want to focus on a very specific aspect of that problem or issue. Very specific. So one way to help is to think about your location. So if we're going to say, well, Southern California, we could look at the effects of climate change on coastal communities in Southern California. Wow, okay, so that's much more specific than saying climate change as a whole in the entire world. Yes, that's a huge, important topic, but it is too huge to tackle in a 8-page paper, and consequently, if we're going to tackle those grand things without being specific, then we're going to be way too general, and we want to try to be as specific as we can. So keep that in mind. If your topic is a controversial one, and what that simply means is that there are multiple perspectives surrounding a single issue, then seek to write a Rogerian argument. As Lunsford and Ruskovich point out, a Rogerian argument approaches audiences in non-threatening ways, finding common ground and establishing trust among those who disagree about issues. To build this trust, it is important to fully, fairly, and even sympathetically state the opposition's position. The key to Rogerian argumentation, continue Lunsford and Ruskovich, is a willingness to think about opposing positions and to describe them fairly. Approaching an argument in this fashion enables the writer to seek an understanding of ideas before casting judgment on them. After all, when we understand the motives behind certain aspects and acknowledge any merits of these perspectives, we can hold our own opinions with greater conviction. So what all this means is, if the topic that you are researching is a controversial one, and again, all I mean by controversial is just if there are many aspects that surround the issue. It doesn't mean that there needs to be, some sort of angry, contentious confrontation. It just means that there are many perspectives that surround the issue that many people hold, and so it's hard to decide what is the best one to have. What I want you to aim for is creating a Rogerian style argument where you're willing to characterize the opposing viewpoints, the different perspectives, fairly and sympathetically, meaning that you're being fair to those positions. You're trying to understand them as they actually are and not imposing any sort of judgment or bias on them. So that's important to keep in mind. All right, so there are a few topics that I want us to avoid writing about. Not because they are unimportant issues, but because they tend to lead us into dogmatic or ideological corners that are hard to get out of. So these topics that I want you to avoid, meaning I do not want you to write about them, are whether abortion is moral or immoral or should be legal or illegal, whether gun control is good or bad, whether we should have the death penalty, whether immigration is good or bad, and whether a God or afterlife exists. Now, there are a couple others, but these are the main ones. So I do not want you all to write about these. Now, again, it's not because they're not important issues, they're very important. It's just that typically we're already very well entrenched in our beliefs about these things. And so it's hard for us to actually treat writing as a learning experience when we are already firmly held in these positions. And what ends up happening is we're very dogmatic and ideological in the way that we construct our arguments. And then we tend to fall into the argument as debate style where we're just trying to win, and that's ultimately not a learning experience and goes against the spirit of this project. So we are going to avoid those topics, but guess what, the entire cosmos, the rest of the cosmos, is your playground. So there are tons and tons of possible topics that you can focus on, so keep that in mind. I would like everybody to run their topics by me before we begin the composition of the essay itself, just so that I can offer any sort of feedback and steer you in the right direction and to make sure that you're being specific enough. And if you do have any questions about topics, you can always message me and ask me questions about that. This essay project is your chance to put into practice all of the concepts we've been reading and learning about so far this semester, and to challenge our capabilities as writers, students, and thinkers. Be sure to review your notes and reread important selections we've covered from Everything's an Argument. Resist your familiar habits and practices as writers. Try something new and exciting. Follow your curiosity, take risks, and attempt to have fun while composing this essay. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and end this video right now, but what I'm going to do is pick it up in a part 2 where I'll go through the various challenges and whatnot. So stay tuned for part 2.